The committee will come to order. A quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Since we are working in a virtual format today, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items before I proceed. First, if you are experiencing connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff contact our designated technical support so it can be resolved immediately. Members participating remotely must continue to use the video function for the duration of their participation in the hearing, unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render the member unable to fully participate on camera. It is committee policy that members will remain muted when not recognized, just like turning your microphone on and off during a hearing in person. This is out of courtesy to all members on this committee and so that background noise does not interfere with another member who is recognized to speak. When you are recognized, you will need to unmute your microphone and pause for a couple of seconds before speaking so that you will be able to hear everything that you say. If you wish to be recognized, please raise your hand using the Zoom hand raise function, unmute your microphone, and ask to be recognized. And in order to ensure that everything members say is captured on the live stream for this hearing, I ask that members pause for 2 to 3 seconds before beginning to speak. If you wish to have a document inserted in the record, please ask for unanimous consent to have your staff email the document to veteransaffairs.hearings@mail.house.gov. It will be uploaded to the committee document repository. Please keep in mind that you will need to refresh the repository page as it does not update automatically. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of seniority for questioning witnesses. This makes it easier for me to ensure all members participating have the opportunity to be recognized. Does any member have a question about the conduct of this hearing with members participating remotely? Seeing none, I will move on to an opening statement. Good morning and welcome everyone to the Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs Oversight hearing. This morning, we'll be examining the current state of the appeals program at the Department of Veterans Affairs, particularly the organizational structure and performance of the Board of Veterans Appeals. Specifically, we intend to focus on 3 major components of this critical mission: workload and performance, human capital, and technology. By the end of our discussion, my hope is that we will all have a better understanding of VA's progress in these 3 areas of concern and what additional support may be needed from Congress to ensure the successful resolution and timely processing of both the remaining legacy appeals and those claims now being processed under the appeals system outlined in the Appeals Modernization Act. For too long, VA's legacy appeals process was slow, complex, contained multiple processing steps, and split jurisdiction between the VA's 3 administrations and the Board of Veterans Appeals. In addition, the process entailed continuous evidence gathering and re-adjudication that delayed the department in reaching a final decision. Veterans and their families faced exceptionally long and unacceptable delays during the VA's disability claims appeal process, with some waiting over 3 to 7 years for a final decision. In 2017, Congress passed the Veterans Appeals Improvement and Modernization Act, or AMA, to overhaul the legacy appeals program and provide veterans and stakeholders with a process that was intended to be both timely and responsive while providing choices when seeking review of a VA claims decision. On February 19, 2019, VA successfully implemented the new claims and appeals system as outlined in the law. As part of this new law, Congress required the VA to submit periodic reports on the implementation of the new appeals system. Review of these reports show that additional work is needed to resolve the remaining appeals in the legacy system and to maintain timely processing in the new AMA system. VA's implementation strategy was evaluated by the Government Accountability Office in 2017 and again in 2018. To this day, there remain open recommendations based on these reports on how the VA intends to assess performance in the new system and VA's IT strategy and how it intends to eliminate reliance on legacy systems such as the Veterans Appeals Control and Location System, or VA clause, as well as how it intends to finalize all remaining enhancements needed in the board's primary processing system known as CaseFlow. Additionally, we cannot discount the impact of COVID. VA reports they are no longer on track to meet its promise to address all legacy appeals by the end of 2022. This is a direct result of impacts from the COVID-19 pandemic. While more work is needed to dig out of the backlogs that were created in several areas of the process to include appeals intake and hearing requests, the board has done a commendable job in providing resolution to thousands of veterans during the midst of the pandemic. The board dispatched over 100,000 appeals during FY 2020 alone. But veterans remain reluctant to attend in-person examinations. We are still learning how the pivot to online hearings are impacting the process, especially with regard to quality and customer satisfaction, as these are not being currently measured. There has also been an uptick in attrition of employees, which rose to 8% last year. Steps must be taken to stem the loss and improve retention of BVA employees. To put it plainly, there is still much work to be done, and that is why it's important that we are coming together today to review these important matters. The VA Appeals Program is often the final chance the department has to appropriately cross every T and dot every I related to a veteran's claim. If this program is not resourced properly, untimely and inaccurate decisions can unfortunately be the result. Let us make it our mission as members of this subcommittee, as department employees and advocates, to ensure such unfortunate results are few and far between, and that quality as well as timeliness are the standard operating procedure as we move forward. With that, I would like to recognize Ranking Member Nels for 5 minutes to give his opening comments.
Thank you, Chair Luria, and thank you to everyone for joining us here today. I am excited to receive an update on VA's appeals process, especially within the Board of Veterans Appeals, or the board. In 2019, VBA and the board implemented the Veterans Appeals Improvement and Modernization Act of 2017, or AMA, which was authored by Ranking Member Bost. The AMA reformed VA's outdated and cumbersome appeals process, while providing veterans with more options to appeal their claims. Before the AMA, veterans waited an exceedingly long time, an average of 5 years in 2015, to receive a board decision on their appeal. Now, veterans can expect to receive a decision from VBA in about 68 days if they appeal through the higher level review lane, and 82 days for supplemental chains. Moreover, the board is completing AMA decisions in under 2 years. This is unheard of in the legacy system. I'm looking forward to hearing how VA intends to sustain timeliness in the new system while increasing the quality of these decisions. I would also like to applaud the VA for drastically reducing the number of legacy appeals. As of December 31st, 2018, there were approximately 415,000 legacy appeals pending at the VA and the VBA board. The VBA has significantly lowered the inventory of legacy appeals to 32,000 as of May 31st, 2021. So well done there. I understand that delayed exams and federal records caused by the pandemic slowed down its progress to reach its target of 15,000 pending legacy appeals. Therefore, I'd like to receive VBA's new timeline for when it will address the remaining legacy appeals. Additionally, the board had to move its goal forward of reducing its inventory of over 100,000 legacy appeals from 2022 to 2023. However, I'm concerned that VA's projections may not account for potential shocks to the system, such as an increased number of appeals from the 3 recently added Agent Orange presumptive conditions. Moreover, the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, the CAVC, recently ruled in the case of Bodette versus McDonough that VA must provide claimants the opportunity to appeal VHA Family Caregiver Program determinations to the board. I understand that VA may be unable to discuss Bodette and its implications today. However, we need to know how this decision will impact the board. We need to know the anticipated number of appeals the board expects to receive. We need to know the staffing, training, and the resources needed to implement it without causing another backlog. Furthermore, I appreciate VA's ability to maintain productivity throughout the COVID-19 pandemic by quickly switching to telenetwork. However, I am troubled that on May 31st of 2021, there are over 51,000 AMA appeals pending in the board's hearing lane. In FY 2020, VA only completed around 2,800 virtual hearings. Clearly, the board needs to ramp up capacity for virtual and in-person hearings if it intends to reduce the backlog. That said, I'm concerned the board may be focusing on production at the expense of quality. The CAVC's 2020 annual report noted that as the number of cases filed at the court has increased, so has the number of cases that were resolved through pre-briefing staff conferences. During these conferences, if the secretary and appellate agree that VA erred, both parties may enter into a joint motion for remand, which returns the case to VA for correction, thus further delaying the veteran's claim. And folks, this is unacceptable. Veterans deserve a thorough and adequate review of their appeal, and they do it the first time. Finally, I'd like to focus on the board's progress deploying case flow. Caseflow is intended to replace the board's outdated IT system for processing claims known as VACOLs. I'd like to discuss the remaining functionality that needs to be built into Caseflow, which will allow VA to sunset VACOLs. I believe the VBA and the board are doing a great work to address legacy appeals while ensuring timely and quality AMA decisions, despite the challenges brought on by the pandemic. However, there are always additional opportunities for improvement. I thank our witnesses for joining us today. And with that, Chair Luria, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Nels. I'd also note that we have the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Boss, with us today. And Mr. Boss, I'd like to recognize you for 5 minutes. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thank you, Chair Luria. And it's a pleasure to be back before the DAMA subcommittee to discuss VA's progress with implementing the Veterans Appeals and Improvement and Modernization Act of 2017, or AMA. I introduced the AMA legislation during my time as chairman of DAMA subcommittee because VA's legacy appeals process was broken. One of my proudest moments, though, was when in Congress, when the President Trump signed in the AMA into law. Veterans were waiting too long to receive a decision on their appeals. They had no choice or control over their appeal. Veterans were frustrated, and we needed to set up a new process that worked for them and the VA. Congress collaborated with the VA and VSOs to craft the AMA. We also partnered with stakeholders to hold VA accountable during the law's implementation. It has been over 2 years since VA fully implemented the AMA, and since then, I've heard from veterans that they are pleased that they can receive a quicker decision under AMA compared to the legacy system. However, I'm concerned that GAO found that the VA is not effectively tracking quality and data about veterans' satisfaction under the new system. Unfortunately, without this information, it's difficult for us to fully understand whether the veterans are better served under the new appeals process. I'm also interested in discussing how we can better leverage technology to expedite and improve accuracy within the appeals process. For example, the Social Security Administration uses machine learning to conduct quality reviews of its benefits decisions. I believe the VA should take its cues from the SSA and make critical investments in technology that will simplify the process. This would allow employees to focus on work that computers can't do. VA should also focus on improving its current system. The GAO reported that the VA support team recently found 35 defects within the board's appeals management IT system called Caseflow. These problems GAO identified in today's testimony include issues with tracking appeals, which may have contributed to the existing appeals backlog. This reminds me of the VA operating in a paper-based environment where they lost appeals. Veterans would wait years but never receive a decision. With today's current system, there is no reason that we cannot effectively track the appeals in the electronic claims processing environment. VA must correct this as soon as possible. Further, I'm troubled GAO and NOVA noted that VA does not have a plan to mitigate timeless challenges for the roughly 57% of veterans choosing the board hearing length. VA's own target is to complete board hearings lanes under 2 years. Right now, I'm encouraged that the VA is completing these appeals in about 534 days. However, today's GAO witnesses has shared that the VA has not implemented a plan to accommodate the increase in the board hearing lane that is likely to come in the next coming years. Ms. Kruta identified 3 new Agent Orange presumption conditions as an example that may shift veterans' behavior for appeals. Additionally, the board hearing lane appeals backlog may increase when the Baudet versus McDonald ruling comes into effect. The Baudet ruling overturned the VA's previous policy, which prohibited claimants from appealing family caregiver programs decisions to the board. I understand that VA may still contest the VA's court's ruling, but right now it's the law of the land. Thus, the The secretary must be prepared to implement the court's decision in a way that does not negatively impact timeline standards. I appreciate the hard work the VA has done to implement the AMA, but we still have more work to do. I look forward to hearing how VA plans to address these issues to ensure that veterans receive timely and quality appeals decisions. And with that, Madam Chairman, I yield back.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Bost. I appreciate your many years of work on this, and thank you for joining us in this important hearing to have an update on the AMA. I am now going to introduce the first of our two panels. The first witnesses on the first panel will be from the Department of Veterans Affairs. We have Ms. Cheryl Mason, Chairman of the Board of Veterans Appeals, and accompanying her is Ron Burke, Deputy Undersecretary for Policy and Oversight from the Veterans Benefits Administration, and Brad Houston, Deputy Chief Information Officer, Account Manager for Benefits, Appeals, and Memorial Affairs from the Office of Information and Technology. We also have from the Government Accountability Office, Elizabeth Kurta, Director of Education, Workforce, and Income Security Issues. Before we get started, I'll just remind our witnesses to please pause for 2 to 3 seconds before you begin speaking so that your testimony will all be captured. And your written statements in full will be included in the hearing record without objection. And I will now recognize Ms. Mason for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Chairwoman Loria, Ranking Member Nils, and members of the subcommittee, and Ranking Member Bost. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the current state of appeals at VA. I am accompanied by Ron Burke of VBA and Brad Houston of OIT. I first want to express my appreciation for your continued support of our veterans. We can't do it without you, our veteran service organizations, our union partners, and other stakeholders, all of whom have helped us provide the best care and services for veterans and their families. Secretary McDonough defined his 4 fundamental principles: advocacy, access, outcomes, and excellence to guide the department in serving veterans and their families. This sacred mission is both personal and professional for me, and it remains the honor of my lifetime to lead the Board of Veterans Appeals in serving veterans. The board's mission is to hold hearings and provide timely decisions so veterans have access to benefits and services they earned and deserve. Every decision I make, every system I develop, and every tax dollar I spend is guided by whether it improves the board's ability to increase access and provide timely outcomes to veterans and their families. I see the board as a place where veterans feel heard and employees are proud to work. In 2016, VA committed to prioritize legacy appeals while adjudicating appeals under AMA. Since November of 2017, we have reduced pending legacy appeals by 71%, from more than 472,000 to less than 135,000 currently. Our legacy commitment and higher than expected AMA appeals have increased the AMA inventory at the board. Today, approximately 82% of the board's decisions are legacy appeals and 20% are AMA appeals. The COVID-19 pandemic presented unique challenges for the board for conducting hearings. The board's employees stepped up, and our partners, the union, the VSOs, and you, members of Congress, enabled us to adapt to these new conditions. Despite moving to a 99% telework posture and suspending all in-person hearings during the pandemic, the board held 15,669 hearings and issued a record 102,663 decisions in FY20. So far this year, the board has issued more than 76,000 decisions, and we are on pace to exceed our goal of 93,600 decisions. Additionally, to date, the board has held over 17,000 hearings and expects this to be a record hearing year. Today, I am pleased to announce that the White House has just approved 20 new veterans law judges to join the board. The board's incredible workforce is made up of diverse professionals devoted to serving veterans by listening to their stories and providing timely decisions. As reflected by the 2020 All-Employee Survey, the board has significantly increased employee engagement and best places to work scores by 15% and 30% respectively in 2 years. The past year and a half has been a difficult one for our board staff. Throughout the pandemic, the board implemented authorities providing for maximum flexibility and safety for our employees. We adjusted production targets for our decision-writing attorneys and held employee listening sessions. Before the pandemic, about 50% of our employees worked telework or remote schedules. But listening to the attorneys and our staff, I have expanded the board's telework and remote options to all eligible employees. Based on the current information, we do not expect to return to our previous footprint in the building. The board is committed to working with our union partners to embrace new ways of conducting business that benefit employees and serve veterans. Developing VHA's telehealth platform to create a telehearing environment, the board became the leader in providing safe and secure virtual telehearings during the pandemic. Virtual telehearings increase veterans' access, especially with rural and high-risk populations, improve the veterans' experience, and align with the Secretary's goal to ensure veterans have timely access to VA resources. The board is also working with OIT to ensure that we have full operational functionality in CaseFlow. CaseFlow is a suite of applications to improve our management and tracking and adjudication of appeals. We do anticipate that future efficiencies will allow us to sunset Backlogs as well as other outdated systems. I am proud to share the remarkable work being done by the board, but there is more work to do. With your support, we will continue to invest in people, processes, and technology to reduce pending hearing requests, increase decisions, and provide solutions that deliver timely benefits and services to our veterans and their families. Chairwoman Loria, Ranking Member Nels, Ranking Member Bost, and the subcommittee. This concludes my testimony, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will now recognize Ms. Curda for 5 minutes.
Chair Loria, Ranking Member Nels, and Ranking Member Bost, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to discuss our work on the VA's implementation of appeals reform, particularly at the Board of Veterans Appeals. I'm pleased that VA has made progress implementing appeals reform and managing these workloads. I also want to commend this subcommittee and the full committee for continued oversight of VA's efforts to plan and implement this complex and important undertaking. The AMA required VA to reform its appeals process. This reform was intended to offer veterans who are dissatisfied with VA's initial decision on their claim more and timely options to appeal. In 2017 and 2018, GAO made several recommendations to address gaps in VA's plans for implementing appeals reform. While VA agreed with these recommendations, as of today, it has only partially addressed them. Although VA has since implemented appeals reform, many of the principles of sound planning that informed our recommendations remain relevant, and we believe that VA could improve its management of the appeals process by more fully addressing our recommendations. Today, I'll discuss VA's progress in addressing our prior recommendations related to 1, managing workload risks, 2, monitoring and assessing performance, and 3, planning for further development of information technology. In terms of managing workload risks, VA has made strides to manage appeals and address our recommendations. For example, VA is monitoring workloads in part through modeling, which enables it to better project resource needs for processing these workloads, as we had recommended. However, VA has not fully developed mitigation strategies for certain workload risks, such as veterans choosing the most resource-intensive of the board's options, a hearing, at much higher rates than originally envisioned. The lack of a risk mitigation strategy is notable today because in mid-June of 2021, VA reported that the hearing option accounted for nearly 60% of the AMA appeals inventory, but the board has made relatively few hearing option decisions in fiscal year 2021. This circumstance could mean veterans have longer wait times and increasing backlogs under this hearing option. As we noted in 2018, VA's ability to effectively manage workloads lies in part in planning ahead and proactively addressing risks that may impact the timeliness and quality of decisions. In terms of monitoring performance, VA has not fully addressed our 2018 recommendations to use a balanced set of measures that, at a minimum, include timeliness, quality, and veteran satisfaction. Recently, VA established timeliness goals for all AMA appeals options, as we had recommended. However, VA is not monitoring or assessing other key aspects of performance. Importantly, the board lacks a quality assurance program and related measures to assess the accuracy of its appeals decisions. A comprehensive quality assurance program is important as the board contends with large workloads, which potentially create pressure to sacrifice work quality to meet timeliness goals. This could result in incorrect decisions or rework to correct errors, thus affecting timeliness from the veteran's perspective. In terms of planning for further IT development, VA deployed its case flow system to support the new appeals process. However, VA has not fully addressed issues with its IT planning that we had identified, such as specifying how and when case flow will achieve all needed functionality. VA implemented appeals reform in February of 2019, but continues to report that case flow provides minimum functionality and to identify functionality yet to be implemented. And recently, VA identified over 35 case flow shortfalls, which create inefficiencies for VA staff and problems communicating with veterans and reporting performance metrics for VA. VA officials told us that they're developing a plan to address these shortfalls. In short, VA's plans for achieving all needed functionality remain as unclear today as we reported originally in 2017. In summary, in 2018, we were concerned about the lack of fully developed risk strategies, performance goals, and measures in IT planning. 3 years later, these gaps are still concerning. GAO remains committed to continuing to assess VA's efforts in this regard and will continue offering VA constructive suggestions so that we can achieve the outcomes we all share, and that's better service for veterans. This concludes my prepared statement, and I'm happy to address your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kurta. We will now move to the question portion of the hearing, and I will recognize myself first for 5 minutes. I'll start by asking Ms. Mason. So the VA made a commitment to Congress, required that in implementing the new appeals system, VA would not forget about the hundreds of thousands of veterans still awaiting resolution and the legacy appeals process. And I'm happy to see that the VA has drastically reduced the number of appeals pending from what was originally around 400,000 to, I think you said in your testimony today, around 135,000 as the first quarter of FY21 concluded. However, the VA set a goal to resolve all of its legacy appeals by the end of 2022, and we are aware that COVID has had an impact. What is the new timeline that you anticipate, and is VA on track to meet this deadline?
So thank you, Chairwoman Loria. We don't have the timeline yet. We're working to set that. The delay in exams and records is impacting the VA's ability to complete those legacy remands and return those to the board. Currently, the board has approximately 102,000 legacy appeals that we are working through very quickly with our strong staff, and we are hiring more staff, as I noted. Additional judges are joining us, along with other staff. So right now what we are doing is we're assessing with budget and our current staffing, and that 22 budget that we asked for plays a huge role in this piece. And it will enable us to meet and set a new timeline, probably sometime in 2023 to work down those legacy appeals. However, I do want to announce today that the new judges who will be joining the board will be primarily working AMA appeals along with their staffs. Everybody will be handling hearings. I'm sure I'll address hearings later in this discussion, but all of the new judges will be assigned to AMA work, as will their teams, and we believe that there's efficiencies in that, and that's really following something that GAO had advised us previously, and we weren't able to do it with the size of our staff at that time or our workload. We can now do that. So we have to tell you to stay tuned for a timeline.
Well, thank you. And I am encouraged with the addition of the 20 new judges that we can help work through these claims more quickly for our veterans who have been waiting. I just wanted to follow up as well for Mr. Burke. We had an oversight hearing back in March on CMP exam delays. So I wanted to follow up and know what the VBA is doing to prioritize exam schedules for veterans who are working through appeals. These veterans in many instances have been waiting years for a decision, and I was curious to understand if they were receiving prioritization in the CMP exam process.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. You know, in the VBA side of the house, we have resolved the legacy appeal inventory by more than 87%. We would have been a little further along had it not been for the impact of COVID. And to your point, ma'am, some of the impact and challenges relative to the exam process. We are working with our VHA partners. We are working with our vendors, challenging them to increase their exam output. We're starting to see the benefit of that increased flow of exams, and those related to remands are being prioritized. I would add we are about 200 cases away from being below 29,000 on the overall remand inventory at VBA. To that end, I think it's important to highlight that today only 13% of that inventory is actionable, meaning only 13% of that 29,000 inventory has completed exams and can take action. Most importantly, I would just stress the importance of clarifying that even within that 13%, not all of those cases will go back to the board, as a portion of that inventory will be resolved appeals. So it's a rather lean inventory. Our timeline has moved into 2023 for resolution, but we are prioritizing and working with all stakeholders on increased exam completions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Burke, for the update, which is encouraging. I wanted, in the time remaining, to go back to Ms. Mason. And can you speak on what information or modeling you relied on to establish the processing goals for the board's evidence docket, which is 550 days, and the hearing docket, which is 730 days or 2 years under the new appeals systems? I noticed that these goals are more than double the time it took for these decisions in 2020. I was curious, do you find it reasonable for a veteran to have to wait 2 years when choosing this option?
I don't find it reasonable for a veteran to have to wait very long for a decision. Unfortunately, with our workload and our docket rules in the law, we must follow those. So we looked at our whole workload and what we were projecting. We're now projecting over 17% or about 17% of AMA appeals into the board. And so we use those numbers for modeling to set our objectives for those 3 lanes. But no, I don't agree that I would like to see it much shorter. My vision is I would like to be able to hold hearings within 6 months and get decisions out the door shortly thereafter. I don't have the resources to do that at this time.
Well, thank you, and I hope to continue the conversation. And you did mention the budget that request that was submitted, so want to continue the conversation to understand how supporting that budget can help the VA move these through more quickly. And I know that I've exceeded my time, so I am going to now recognize Mr. Nels for 6 minutes, because I know I went over as well.
Chairwoman, we're just fine. Thank you. I'd like to thank the Honorable Ms. Mason for being here, and I've I understand the VA intends to submit its plan for implementing the Bodette ruling to the CABC later this week. However, I would like for VA to explain how the court's decision will impact the board, including the effect on the board's workload and the staffing, the resources and funding needed to implement that. Ms. Mason.
So Ranking Member Nils, thank you for your question. Unfortunately, I can't answer that question at this time. It would be premature for me to do so. We are in negotiations with opposing counsel, and the court has granted the extension through Thursday for us to submit a plan. So that's information I can't provide because I don't have it yet until we reach those decisions.
Well, we hope we can get some good news soon. The VA's budget request for FY 2022 included an additional 35 veterans law judges. You mentioned the 20. I'm assuming those other 15 are going to come sometime at some point in time. Are they going to meet that request? Are they going to follow through or what?
Well, here's where we are. The 20 were part of the 21 budget. When I sat down with the secretary during his second week actually on the job, one of the issues I presented to him was the challenges that the board had with our resources, given everything that was coming at us that we saw as a result of COVID. Our COVID operations were fantastic, but they did show us some gaps, and we received some more information in that process. So he authorized us to go to 138 judges, and it also authorized the budget request. So we have now received 20 of those judges from the White House. As we go forward, we will be announcing another cohort. We will be announcing another announcement for veterans law judges once I get the 22 funding. I can't hire additional judges without the 22 funding. And additionally, just let me be clear that one judge equals about 10 staff, both attorneys and administrative staff. So the judges are great and are very important to our mission, and they carry the mission of hearings and decisions, but our staff is the glue that holds us all together. And so that funding is extremely important.
I think we can all agree to that. I see that the FY 2022 included 100 staff attorneys as well to help reduce those appeals. But well, thank you. And Please explain why the GAO believes the board needs to develop a quality assurance program for AMA appeals. Ms. Curda.
Certainly. I mean, managing performance, all aspects of performance are important for any organization, and particularly important for appeals of hearings where decisions have an enormous impact on the appellant's, well-being. And so we're concerned that although VA has established timeliness goals for all of its hearings options, it doesn't currently have a quality assurance process or quality goals and metrics for assessing the quality of its performance. And without this kind of information, the board cannot pinpoint areas where errors may be occurring, and this can result in rework. It can result in a veteran getting an inaccurate decision. It can result in subsequent appeals. And so it's very important for the board to establish a quality assurance framework and also to monitor the quality performance so that it can take corrective actions. It can implement things like training or make changes to policy as necessary.
Thank you. And additional question, could you elaborate on the board's lack of an effective risk mitigation strategy and how that could impact the timeliness and quality of AMA's decisions in the future?
Certainly. It is important to recognize that the progress that VA has made, but as we've noted in our statement and our work going back to 2017, VA hasn't fully addressed sound planning practices such as for managing workload risks. One of the biggest risks is not proactively dealing with the high appeal rates for the resource-intensive options like hearings, which could impede delivery of timely and high-quality appeal decisions for either legacy or new appeals with its current resources. Another potential workload risks are the growing number of initial claims appeals that can have downstream effects on appeals workloads. These growing workloads include, I think as someone alluded to earlier, the other new presumptions for illnesses related to Agent Orange, Blue Water Navy claims that are coming in now, or potentially future toxic exposure claims. And I think others have referred to the recent court decision that may offer caregivers of seriously wounded veterans who were previously denied benefits from VA the chance to appeal directly to the board. So these are some big unknowns that could have great implications for resources and workloads that VA will need to contend with. To mitigate these workload risks, VA could use modeling and sensitivity analysis to anticipate resource needs under different scenarios and assumptions, and determine the potential impact on achieving timeliness and other goals, and develop appropriate plans to address the risk that goals will not be achieved.
Thank you, Ms. Curda, for your work and your dedication and commitment to the veterans. And with that, Chair Leary, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Nels. I'm going to go through the speaking order that I have, and I think that some people may have had to leave temporarily because there's multiple hearings happening today. But next, I was planning to recognize Mr. Bost, Ms. Slotkin, Mr. Moore, Mr. Rees, and then Ms. Miller-Meeks. Of those people on the screen right now, I see that Mr. Moore is on, so I'll recognize you next. And for the others, we will come back when they join. And Ms. Slot can just rejoin, so I will recognize you after Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I don't have any questions at this point in time. I may have some a little later in the hearing, but at this point, I don't have any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moore, for joining us.
Thank you.
I will now shift to Ms. Slotkin for 5 minutes.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it. And you're right, there are multiple hearings going on. I apologize for going back and forth. I had a couple of questions, and I think the first one, sorry, as I just turned to it, is for Ms. Mason. So I have a constituent in my district who I think is like a symbolic example of the kinds of problems that people have been having. He's a Gulf War veteran. He's been navigating the VA appeals process since 2018. I think without going through the back and forth, it was just multiple bites at the apple, multiple attempts to hear from the VA. The information you get back gives no timeline. It gives no sense of when people might actually get resolution, whether there's more information needed. Just just assume that there was a ton of back and forth between 2018 and February of 2019. And I guess the question I have is, what is the appeals process? Is there a way to get a timeline attached when you get an answer back? Is there a way to give some kind of like bounding to this process so a veteran isn't just suspended in, suspended animation waiting to hear back from the VA?
So thank you, Representative Slotkin. So yes, there is actually, we do have the VA claims and tracking option, which is on our website, on our va.gov website, so veterans can find out where they are in the process, and it's pretty up to date. So we let them know where we are. That is one of the challenges we do have working with our docket rules. At the board, cases must be worked in docket order under the law. So legacy, of course, is a docket-driven program, as is the new AMA process. So cases can come in, primarily we see this in legacy, and push somebody else for, to wait longer. And so we do try to communicate that. That is actually part of what was written into the AMA, was that we would communicate with the veterans and tell them where they were, what was going on, and provide a lot of information to them. We do this primarily with the representatives as well. I can't tell you the number of emails and contacts I get from representatives, from VSOs, attorneys, as well as you all, as well as White House, asking the same thing. But because of the way our workload is very fluid, it does change on a regular basis. That's why having the resources is really important, so I can have more people to work in certain areas.
Okay, so I mean, we got involved obviously because they had received so much back and forth and didn't know how to navigate it. And I'll have to confirm, it surprises me that they would actually get an accurate update online or through this website, because what they were relying on was the mail, right? Waiting for a letter, which was a very slow, kind of old school, like a la 1960s approach to getting communication on your appeal. Is there any conversation about changing and moving away from snail mail?
There actually is. The law currently requires the board to mail. That's the law. So, but we are working. VBA, our partners at VBA have worked on electronic notification, and that's something we're joining together to work with them. That is something also that is very important. I think that we do need to move forward with that in keeping our veterans and their families up to date on the status.
Great. I appreciate your time, and I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Slotkin. I will now recognize Representative Miller-Meeks. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chair Luria, and thank you for our panelists. And first, let me just say that I'm a 24-year military veteran, also a physician, so I know the hurdles you have in both getting providers to be able to do exams and complete this process, and also as a veteran, I have heard some of the same things that Representative Slotkin just mentioned. But I did want to let you know, Chair Mason, that my VSO director, so I just resigned as a commissioner on the Wapello County Board of Veterans Affairs, and our executive director, our VSO, Terry Bradley, he's a Coastie, I'm Army, so we've got a little bit of a challenge there in getting along. No, not really. But he wanted me to tell you personally that he is very pleased with what you're doing with the VA Board of Veterans Affairs progress, and he wanted me to tell you to keep up the good work. So that's before I then hit you with the bad question. No, so thank you for that from the Wapello County veterans. And I wanted to expand a little bit on the question by Chairman Nels and Chairman Mason, if you would please detail why the board was unable to execute a quality review process for the AMA appeals.
So thank you for your question, and very much thank you for your service, and please send my regards to your colleague. Let me address the quality review issue there. The board does have a quality review office, and we've had one for many, many years, and it's firmly established. We are reassessing how that quality review program works for all of our quality. We actually are in the process of changing the name to Quality Assurance and working with both GAO and ACUS, Administrative Conference of the U.S. So we've had a legacy program, quality review process in place for our legacy cases for many years, and that's a 92% is what we aim for. With AMA, because of the changes, especially with the last year with COVID, the board has been through a lot of change. And so we took this year as a baseline year for our AMA to set the quality. Last year, we just didn't have enough cases to really accurately assess that. This year, we do. And so that is something we're looking at. But we are looking in the future to how we can use technology to expand our quality review. One of the things the board actually implemented this year in beginning of 2021 is what we call Project Stoplight, which is a technology piece similar to Social Security, but it's an internal in-house program that's part of our IDT program for decision writing, which actually identifies in the decision areas where it's case law or whether it's judge specific, highlights, stop, look, let's pay attention here, this may be wrong or it's incorrect. And that's something that we built in-house and we've been using over the past year. And we're very proud of that program. Again, it's in its infancy. So we do have a quality review program, which we are changing to quality assurance, and we will be making additional changes in there. I believe the numbers about the court were mentioned in those. Those are concerning to us, but those aren't all errors. Those are primarily disagreements. So thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Curta, please elaborate on how the board's lack of an effective risk mitigation strategy could impact the timeliness and quality of AMA decisions in the future.
Certainly. And without a risk mitigation strategy, there's no ability to kind of proactively game out what could happen under different scenarios with different risks. And so the issue isn't so much that the board can't be successful, but there's a risk that it will be less successful than it could be if it doesn't think through some of all these risks that are coming down the road or even present, as in the case of COVID-19, and how that can affect workloads. And so we would just encourage the board to continue to refine its modeling processes and its sort of projection capabilities to think about sort of worst case scenarios. For example, when they were originally contemplating AMA, the thinking was a relatively small percentage of claims, appeals would go to the hearing option. But it turns out it's actually pretty big. And so what if that continues to grow? What does that mean for resource needs in the future? What are sort of the projected claims coming in on the new presumptive illnesses? And what are some possible rates of appeals for those cases, and when might they start seeing those showing up? So just sort of a little more sophisticated ability to kind of get ahead of the issues and think about what does that mean for resource allocation, resource needs. It's not always new resources. Sometimes it's just how you allocate your resources. So these are just all things that we think the board, should be working on.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Ms. Curta. Thank you, Representative Lurie. I apologize. I went over on my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Miller-Meeks. I will move into a second round of questions, and I know that some members have had to pop in and out, and others have, had their questions answered. But I just wanted to take the opportunity again, while you're here, Ms. Mason, to talk about the new appeals system. It provides veterans with a choice in how they seek to review. They seek review and a decision. 60% of incoming appeals choose the hearing option. And with an increased number of hearings coming in, I understand almost 2,000 per month and an inventory of approximately 90,000 pending. What is the board doing to ensure veterans are not waiting and are benefiting from the new process? I know we've mentioned the new judges and staff that you're planning, but kind of my thought is, you know, it seems that a higher than anticipated number of people are actually choosing the hearing option than when this was initially put in place.
Thank you for the question, ma'am. Yes, that is correct. More people are choosing than initially expected, although we started to see it grow pretty quickly, and we initially started pivoting. Actually, we started planning because of the virtual telehearings testing we were doing in 2019 to add to this new hearing portfolio, to our hearing portfolio of our already existing video hearings and in-person hearings, as well as the travel board hearings that are reducing in their only legacy. So the first thing we did was we started talking to our VSO partners and our representatives to find out why people were requesting hearings, what was going on there. And they just really felt that they wanted to be heard by the board. They felt that it was their only chance to be heard in the VA process. And we completely understand that. I've been a judge for a long time, so I understand that. So one of the things we did actually during COVID, when we kicked off with you guys' help passing that VA Hearing Modernization Act so quickly, was we initially pivoted to telehearings, and we started scheduling. Currently today, the board schedules 1,000 telehearings a week, or 1,000 hearings a week, the majority of which are telehearings. Our show rate is about 60%. And so we are working with our VSO and private representative partners to address that issue. And in fact, one of the things I've been asking for since 2019 that I'm going to implement this year is a hearing summit, much like what we did with an appeals summit in 2016, to discuss this issue, because it is a rising number. We have reduced legacy appeals to about 40,000 hearings, but AMA appeals are growing. I have about 25 judges per day scheduled for hearings, but I don't have a show rate that's high enough. And so we need to figure that out.
Well, no, I appreciate you bringing that up. I do see that as a problem, and it dovetails into something that I've heard from some veterans directly to my office, that sometimes veterans are receiving as little as 1 or 2 days notice. Do you find that that's a persistent issue? And, you know, has the board implemented any processes to notify veterans farther in advance, to have, you know, a confirmation that could potentially help boost this show rate and be more efficient for the judge's time and the veterans?
Yes, so actually I looked into that because I heard that as well, and I was very concerned because the law requires that we give veterans 30 days notice and their representatives, and we have done so. And I've checked with our hearing team, that is happening. In fact, right now we're scheduling about 60 days out for all hearings. So everybody has noticed well in advance. What I found in kind of chasing this issue down is that the representative was given notice, but many times, sometimes the representative is the big representative and it's not giving notice to its smaller units. And so that's unfortunately not a board problem, but it's something that we want to work with our VSOs on and support them, because they are our partners, and figure out how to do that better. So we do give at least 30 days notice. And right now we're starting travel boards again in August, and all of those veterans have been noticed.
Okay. And lastly, we are more than 2 years past the full implementation of the new program. What feedback have you received from veterans on the new process, and how have you responded to that feedback?
So thank you. As you know, we run the V-Signals survey with our VEO partners in the department, and we monitor these survey results very closely. Veterans are very, very pleased with the virtual telehearings in particular. They are very pleased, both VSOs and representatives, with the AMA process. They do understand that that the hearings lane is taking longer. And I think, as Ms. Curta touched on, as they have noted that they would like to have a little bit more understanding about what that timeline is. And that's something we're working on. But we do have service recovery in place. One of the things people asked for was what happens at a hearing. So we did a YouTube video for one of the judges to explain what happens at a hearing, to provide that information.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I see that my time has expired. Just want to give a last opportunity for any of my other colleagues who might wish to ask questions. I see I know that Mr. Nels and Ms. Miller-Meeks indicated they had gotten the information in their first round, but I see Dr. Ruiz has joined us again. If you would like, Dr. Ruiz, I can recognize you for 5 minutes.
Yes, please. Thank you. Let me just fix my screen here. There it is. Thank you for holding this important hearing today. I know it is important to everyone here that we continue to work towards improving our appeals process so that our veterans are able to get closure to their cases in a timely manner. Additionally, as Congress and the VA continue to work to get toward greater health coverage for veterans who are sick from their exposure to burn pits and other toxins, it is critical that the appeal system is efficient, has minimal backlog, and is prepared for the influx of claims it may receive. Here are a number of questions for the GAO for you to choose. And this is to the GAO person here. What, if any, plans does the board have for mitigating backlogs and dockets that are in higher demand, such as hearings?
Thank you. And I would certainly defer to Chairwoman Mason on their plans, but we have not seen any detailed plans on how they are planning to mitigate the risk there. And so, we are continuing to work with the board sort of proactively on some of these issues, and would welcome, seeing their plans and working with them on that.
So GAO stated that the board should have a balanced set of goals and metrics to assess how well it is performing under the new appeals process. What goals and metrics still need to be developed, and why has it taken so long to develop them?
Well, certainly performance measurement is a basic management tool the board should be using to obtain ongoing information about the appeals process and to identify possible underperforming areas for continuous improvement. 2 years after implementation, VA now has a complete set of timeliness measures for all of its appeals options, which is great, but it still lacks a quality assurance process, as I've mentioned, and measurable goals for the quality of its decisions and also veteran satisfaction.
How would you measure the quality of decisions and veteran satisfaction? How would you recommend they do so?
Well, there's a lot of flexibility to kind of do that in different ways. I mean, with veteran satisfaction, they've already conducted some surveys which get at veteran satisfaction with sort of the process and how the process is working. Some of those things could become sort of regular metrics that they use to sort of gauge how well things are going. I haven't seen the data from the veteran satisfaction survey, but they could pick out some key measures in the survey and sort of have an ongoing question cards to veterans as they go through the process, so they can get that data on an ongoing basis and monitor whether things are changing. Sometimes as things change in a process, satisfaction can go down or go up, and it's good to know that. As far as quality goes, there's lots of different things they can do. They can do inspections, of decisions sort of after the fact, to see, by a more experienced a judge to see did they kind of get everything right. You can do in-process reviews, and I think that might have been something Chairwoman Mason alluded to, that they may be doing right now, but where they look at something in the process of being decided to make sure it's correct before it gets done. So and then just set goals for the accuracy rates, and this is something
in medicine, I'm a physician, and in medicine they have a satisfaction survey composed of 5 questions, because you got to have it very simple, or else the veteran or the patient won't complete it. And every patient gets a card. They fill it out, they check the box, the postage paid for, and they mail it back in. And the physicians, either their bonuses or their salaries, after a year are adjusted based on their patient satisfactions with them. I think that would be very interesting. The other thing that we do is we have peer-reviewed case studies where they will randomly choose different cases, send it to another physician or a group, and then they would review whether or not things were done well, the charting or whatnot. So I think those are good ideas, and we definitely need to measure that quality of care in a way that will resonate with patients and will improve the culture at the VA. I appreciate it, and I yield back my time.
Thank you. And I see Representative Miller Meeks has requested an additional question. And I know I believe for Mr. Houston, we wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to speak and provide us some information at today's hearing. So I'll call on Representative Miller Meeks.
Thank you so much, Representative Luria. And Mr. Houston, I just wanted to ask, is the board working to improve functionality within va.gov to allow veterans to submit claims online? And I know for older veterans, that's not necessarily their preference, but for the number of younger veterans that are coming through with disabilities, I think this will become an increasingly important tool. If you are, what's your timeline for completion?
Well, thank you for the question, ma'am. So we are working pretty much across the board about improving the board's IT systems. We do have a project for a va.gov improvement that's for next fiscal year, specifically for appeals. I know that a couple of the comments earlier were that things haven't gone as fast as Chairman Mason would like, and I absolutely agree with that. And we actually have brought in a vendor and a whole team to make sure we nail down their project plans for everything in the board, which includes va.gov. But we're doing that, but we will be doing va.gov for appeals in fiscal year 22.
Well, you answered my second question, which was, are you going to have an outside vendor, outside contractor? So thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. And I'll be sure to pass that information along. Thank you. I yield back, Representative Luria. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to say thank you again to our witnesses on the first panel. Thank you for all the work that you're doing on behalf of the veterans. And I'm sure we'll continue this conversation and are here to support. So please stay in communication with the committee and any way that we are able to provide the resources to better serve our veterans. That is definitely our goal. I am now going to recognize the second panel. If you would like to turn on your videos, I know we normally rearrange at the tables, but yes. Okay, I think I see our witnesses for the second panel. So I wanted to thank our veteran advocate groups who are with us today for the second panel, as well as a representative from the American Federation of Government Employees. Our witnesses on this panel include Shane Learman, who is the Deputy National Legislative Director for the Disabled American Veterans, Gillian Slovic, Second Vice President of Afge Local 17, and Diane Boyd-Rauber, Executive Director of the National Organization of Veterans Advocates. As we get started, I'll again remind our witnesses to please pause for 2 to 3 seconds before you begin speaking so that we can capture all of your testimony. Again, your written statements in full will be included in the hearing record without objection. And I will start now by recognizing Mr. Learman for 5 minutes. It's good to have you back again before the committee.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Chairwoman Luria, Ranking Member Nels, and members of the subcommittee. On behalf of DAV, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you here today. In 2020, DAV represented veterans and families in more than 160,000 claims and more than 16,000 decided appeals by the board. DAV represented nearly 20% of all board decisions in fiscal year 2020, the largest amount of any accredited VSO. Based on our experience, our testimony will discuss the Appeals Modernization Act, or the AMA, the performance of the board, and our concerns, including the backlog of pending hearings, the AMA appeals intake process, and remand decisions. Madam Chair, starting in 2015, DAV collaborated with VBA, the board, and other stakeholders to improve and modernize the appeals system. The AMA, a veteran-centric appeals process, was the result of those combined efforts and was implemented in 2019. As reflected in the board's FY 2020 report, AMA successfully reduced the amount of time for appeals by 1,200 days when in comparing to legacy appeals. We thank the DAMA subcommittee for their efforts and support in getting AMA passed into law. In fiscal year 2020, the board issued over 100,000 decisions and surpassed its goal by over 11,000 cases. They also improved decision output by approximately 8% and achieved an accuracy rating of almost 91%. Although the board performed exceptionally well, we are greatly concerned about the long-term and potentially negative impact of the pending backlog of hearings. In February 2020, the board had approximately 76,000 pending hearings, and as of July 1st, the board has over 91,000 pending hearings. Madam Chair, we are concerned that the board does not have a definitive plan for addressing the backlog, and we recommend that the board, in collaboration with VBA and stakeholders, develop a written plan to address the backlog of pending hearings. Although the office of the clerk of the board position was created, DAV is continuing to discover AMA appeals that are deemed invalid and should not have been docketed. Invalid appeals may not be discovered for months and in many instances negatively impact veterans as they cannot take other timely actions. Madam Chair, DAV recommends the board to create an intake and docket training curriculum for all board personnel. By establishing this training, they can greatly reduce the number of invalid AMA appeals and attain greater efficiency without potentially creating effective date issues for veterans and their families. In FY 2020, 40% of legacy appeals were remanded. And as was noted recently, the board indicated there are 30,000 legacy remands pending within VA regional offices. DAV recommends that VBA and the board develop a plan or an agreement to expedite all legacy remands, specifically those that are waiting for VA examinations or additional evidence and records requested from the National Personnel Records Center. In fiscal year 2020, 28% of AMA appeals were remanded, and in June of this year, the AMA remand rate increased to over 30%. We are greatly concerned by the percentage of remands, as one of the original intents of AMA was to reduce these. We believe this high percentage of pre-decision errors is in part due to training issues within VBA, which is verified by the June 2021 GAO report. Madam Chair, to improve VBA quality and reduce AMA remands, we recommend that VBA and the board track all of the AMA remanded cases. This will allow the board to identify the reasons for the remand, provide feedback to VBA, and establish training specific to the pre-decision errors that are being remanded by the board. In closing, DAV is greatly appreciative of VBA and the board's efforts with AMA, and it is evident that AMA has greatly reduced the average days to a decision from the board. With our recommendations, the appeals process will continue to be more efficient and provide veterans and their families quicker access to their earned benefits and health care. Madam Chair, this concludes my testimony, and I look forward to any questions you and the members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Learman. I will now recognize Ms. Slovic for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairwoman Luria, Ranking Member Nels, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting the American Federation of Government Employees to participate in today's hearing. My name is Jillian Slovic, and I've served as a frontline attorney for the Board of Veterans Appeals for 12 years and serve as the second vice president of Afge Local 17, which represents 871 board attorneys and additional support staff. On behalf of Afge, its National Veterans Affairs Council, it's an honor to have this opportunity to provide input to the subcommittee. Today, I plan to identify problems facing board attorneys in performing their duties and offer suggestions that can help with recruitment and retention. In examining the workload and performance of board attorneys, it's critical to understand the continually evolving quotas and performance metrics board attorneys face, the obstacles outside an attorney's control, and the differences between legacy claims and the new Appeals Modernization Act, AMA claims. The board has made significant changes regarding performance metrics. Prior to the implementation of AMA, attorneys were expected to complete 125 cases a year. In fiscal year 2018, the board increased its production and standards to 169 cases per year, a 35% increase in production requirements. In 2019, the board created an alternative measure of production, evaluating the total number of issues decided, setting that number at 510 issues. In FY 2020, the issue quota was raised to 566. In FY 2021, the quota was changed to 156 cases of 491 issues to adjust to COVID-19. AFGE members and board attorneys are proud of their hard work. However, extraordinarily challenging and constantly changing metrics make it more difficult to meet standards, setting attorneys up for failure. The board recently announced that it's increasing its quota by 20,000 cases this year. AFG truly fears that if individual quotas are increased, many hardworking and successful attorneys will leave the board. Because of this, AFGE urges Congress to request a Government Accountability Office study on the production standards of board attorneys to determine what is feasible. An additional concern is the requirement that an attorney may only receive credit for a case once a judge signs off on the work, severely delaying an attorney's ability to timely reach his or her quota. These delays are entirely out of the attorney's control, and the requirement is arbitrary and should be adjusted. Further, like many workplaces throughout the nation, COVID-19 affected attorneys working at the board. There have historically been between 2 to 3 employees on performance improvement plans, known as PIPs, at any one time, often related to an attorney's quota. Currently, in the midst of a pandemic, there are 31 attorneys on PIPs, 20 of whom are women, many of whom are parents of young children who do not have childcare for all or part of the COVID-19 pandemic. As a mother of a young child myself, I can assure you that having my child at home made a hard job requiring intense focus and concentration even more difficult. While attorneys are grateful for the change in quotas, the biggest concession by management during this unprecedented time was the suspension of core hours. While helpful to some, telling attorneys that they could now work on nights and weekends while still raising children had a predictably negative effect on morale and only increased pressure on working parents. Considering these exceptional circumstances, AFG urges the board to show the empathy required by the circumstances when evaluating the performance of its employees during the pandemic. Lastly, a critical issue that affects the board's productivity is its transition from legacy appeals to AMA appeals. The board does not distinguish between the two types of claims when assigning work to attorneys. AFG strongly urges the board to allow considering some attorneys to exclusively process legacy appeals and others to work on AMA appeals, allowing each group to fully immerse themselves in one type of claim. This would allow attorneys to specialize, making their work easier and allowing them to better serve veterans. Regarding the board attorney workforce, 148 board attorneys resigned or were removed from the board between March of 2019 and June of this year. I want to highlight several small changes that I think would help improve morale. AFG urges the secretary to create journeyman, non-supervisory GS-15 board attorney positions. Creating the possibility of a GS-15 attorney would help with recruitment and retention. AFG also urges the board to increase the amount of training it provides and to include representatives from AFGE Local 17 to participate in its design. Considering that of the 148 attorneys who left the board between March 2019 through June 2021, 85 were GS-11s, providing better training with input from tenured board attorneys would help with the retention of newer attorneys. Requiring the VA or board to work with union representatives can be mandated by Congress, and AFG urges the Secretary and Subcommittee to support both of these changes. Additionally, we recommend that VA utilize its existing authority to reimburse every board attorney for the costs associated with maintaining their membership to one state bar. This would be a simple, equitable, and non-cost prohibitive way to retain attorneys at the board. Reimbursement for continuing legal education would also be appreciated for attorneys licensed in states that require such. Lastly, since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, attorneys have had to use telework. While preferable for some, AFG wants to ensure that once offices are reopened, there's flexibility for attorneys and administrative staff to utilize as much or as little telework as they choose. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify at today's hearing and look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Slovic. I would now like to recognize Ms. Robber for 5 minutes.
Chairman Loria, Ranking Member Nels, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the VA Appeals Program and the state of modernization efforts. The AMA was intended to simplify appeals, provide veterans with more choice and control, and eliminate effective date traps. As we discussed today, optimal improvement cannot be achieved until both the Board of Veterans Appeals and the Veterans Benefits Administration address ongoing challenges. It is important to recognize that the work of the board and VBA can never be considered in total isolation, as the work of one entity impacts the other. First, NOVA continues to be concerned with the board's hearing backlog. Veterans have indicated their continued desire to be heard by requesting hearings at a nearly 60% rate in the AMA system. The board pivoted admirably during the COVID-19 pandemic to implement virtual hearings. While NOVA members appreciate and use the virtual hearing option, this change alone will not solve the problem. Congress should support the board's request for more staffing and resources, as well as continue its oversight on additional solutions to this problem. Second, related to dealing with the hearing backlog, the board also needs to set timeliness goals for its hearing and evidence lanes. The need for such goals has been discussed since the time of AMA negotiations and is just now being addressed. GAO identified this as a critical need, and Congress should consider its oversight to ensure these goals, which appear now to perhaps have been set, to be met and improved upon. Third, VA often rejects, denies, or delays filings based on use of an improper form, but then fails to provide claimants with specific information on how to correct filing errors. Sometimes these rejections are erroneous, and advocates spend significant time seeking review of these errors. Veterans and their representatives sometimes end up filing several different forms due to this lack of clarity. This does not further VA's stated goal of increased efficiency going back to 2015 when it instituted rigid form filing requirements. Rather, confusion about forms and lack of clear instructions result in unnecessary adjudications and decreased efficiency. Fourth, just last week, GAO publicly released a report addressing training deficiencies. NOVA members report inconsistent adjudication reflecting these deficiencies, particularly as related to AMA procedures. For example, supplemental claims are frequently denied based on a lack of new and relevant evidence, even though the low bar required for such evidence clearly has been met. There's continuing confusion regarding AMA opt-ins from supplemental statements of the case, with these appeals being erroneously certified to the board as legacy appeals. Across VA, there is a failure to properly preserve the correct and earliest effective date, diluting the goal of eliminating effective date traps. If some of these recurring issues are not resolved, there is a risk the VBA review lanes will be underutilized and the board review lanes will be overutilized, adding to the backlog. Given GAO's findings, Congress should provide continued oversight of VA's training programs. Fifth, despite implementation of centralized mailing, VA's failure to properly notify appointed representatives of decisions continues. NOVA has testified about this problem before. We continue to receive regular complaints from our members regarding VA's noncompliance with its statutory, regulatory, and policy requirements surrounding mailed notification. In a recent court case, Romero v. Tran, the board in fact admitted to widespread mailing issues. The attorney had submitted evidence of at least 863 instances of notice noncompliance. NOVA supported this statement with an affidavit indicating nearly 300 more. Although the court found the appellate had rebutted the presumption of regularity, too often VA uses the presumption as a shield. Cases arguing notice violations by the board and VBA continue to clog the system. Congress previously investigated VA's mailing practices, and we urge this committee to take another look. Finally, Congress should support VA's requests for funding to improve its IT systems supporting adjudication, such as VBMS and CaseFlow. These improvements should include ones that make systems more user-friendly for advocates, because these systems are critical to tracking cases and providing competent representation to veterans and their families. In conclusion, NOVA is committed to working with this subcommittee, VA, and fellow stakeholders to improve the appeals process. Thank you again for allowing NOVA to provide our views, and I would be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Robber. We will now move to questions from members of the subcommittee, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes. I will start by asking a question for both Mr. Learman and Ms. Robber. I've heard of concerns, and we've mentioned them in the hearing today, with growing backlog at the board and some scheduling hiccups. What concerns do you have, and have you heard from your members and organizations? And do you feel that the virtual hearing platform is working well to serve veterans?
Thank you, Chairwoman. We have witnessed and seen some of these hiccups or these issues, especially when there was the original transition to the virtual hearings last year. However, our office at the Board of Veterans Appeals has indicated a lot of that has smoothed out as far as issues with veterans in our organizations and some of the hiccups of even scheduling and accessing virtual hearings. But to your point about the backlog, there was 76,000 in 2020. We're at 91,000. If the VA and the board and VBA doesn't have a plan put in place to address the issue now, we're going to see a backlog that'll continue to grow over time. And 3 years from now, we may be looking at 150,000 hearings backlog.
Chairman Loria, I would say that our members have definitely appreciated the board's efforts with the virtual hearing platform because it does allow a representative to be in one location, a veteran to be another location, and the board staff to be in a third location. But I would say that we do hear reports of scheduling difficulties. And while the hearing branch has certainly expressed interest in working with people, I would come back to our concerns about how representatives and veterans are being notified and the continuing problems with VA's mailing practices and notification.
Thank you. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Just to clarify, is the only means by which people are being notified by mail, or are you aware of any other follow-up communication? Like, is there an additional phone call and an email? I mean, are we using multiple means of communication or just mail?
You know, as Chairman Mason noted, the board is required to provide notice by mail. I do think there are other communications going on between the hearing branch and representatives, but I think that because of some of the issues with notification, there is no email notification that's consistent. And I think this is an area that really needs improvement in the future.
Okay, thank you. And I also wanted to follow up because you've represented individuals who are both in the legacy and the AMA process. Can you speak whether you feel there's a true improvement in the timeliness and quality of decisions under the AMA?
Oh, absolutely, Chairwoman Lawyer. There is a huge difference, especially in the speed to what they're getting done and how quickly they're moving along. I represented veterans for DAV for 23 years and 5 years at our office at the Board of Veterans Appeals. Saw firsthand how many of these cases would be 4 to 5, even 6 years before they'd get to the Board of Veterans Appeals for the hearing. Then, as was noted earlier, if they don't have the right docket date, they could even wait for a year to two after the hearing for a decision. So the new process has greatly streamlined that. We're talking at least on an average 1,200 days from the time they request that to the board to the time they're getting a decision. And I think one of the reasons we're seeing an increase in hearing requests, the legacy appeals process, veterans could request a hearing with a local decision review officer within the VA regional office. Now they no longer have that opportunity. So the only opportunity to have the hearing is with the board. I think that really is the reason why we're seeing such an increase in requests for hearings, is because they'd have no other opportunity to be heard like they did in the legacy system.
I would certainly agree with Shane's statement regarding the increase in hearings. And I think we have always supported and think a huge improvement in the new system is the fact that it's no longer a two-step process, that the veteran has the choice to go straight to the board should he or she want to do so. And that does eliminate a lot of the lengthy delays that were in the legacy system. However, listening today, I think it's very important, as GAO said, for the board to be implementing a quality assurance program and for there to be care to be sure that in the haste to get out decisions, quality is not being sacrificed.
Well, thank you both for your responses, and I will now turn to Ranking Member Nels for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Leary. My first question is for Shane. Number one, I make a comment. You got a guy down there in Houston, Texas. His name is Robert Delgado. He works for the DAV down there, and I know veterans are reaching out to him, and he's doing a heck of a job getting veterans their appointments, their exams that they need. So I'm just letting you know that I'm hearing a lot of good things about what the DAV is doing for our veterans that are trying to get through this process. So thank you. And his name is Robert Delgado. A question for you is, how can the VA improve the quality of AMA decisions that have been remanded by the board?
Thank you very much, Ranking Member. And yes, I know Robert well. Actually, I'll pass your comments on along to him. In reference to increasing the quality, I think there's a lot of reasons why there's a high percentage of remands on AMA cases, which nobody expected. I think originally everybody was talking it would be between 10 and 15%. Now we're at 30. I think VBA trains their employees to their training manual, not to the statutory requirements or to the law. So a lot of times when they're making decisions, it's based on their training manual, which at many times is in conflict with actually what the law requires them to do. So they're not fulfilling everything the law requires. Thus, the board, the VLJ, has no choice but to send that back to be corrected. I think if they increase the training specific to statutes and laws and not their own manuals, VBA would increase their efficiency and we would see the number of AMA appeals remands drastically drop.
Thank you, sir. And for Ms. Robert, please elaborate on your testimony regarding the gaps in VA's training on AMA appeals and your suggestions, ma'am, for how the VA could address these challenges.
Well, there are definitely gaps, and I've explained a few of them in my statement, but also in my written statement, I elaborated some more. And I think there needs to be additional oversight of training, and I think there needs to be more collaboration with stakeholders to talk about where we are actually seeing the gaps and to hear from the stakeholder community about what some of the problems are in the system generally.
Thank you. And my last question for Ms. Slavic, why does the AFGE suggest that board attorneys be able to specialize in legacy or AMA appeals?
Thank you for your question. As was discussed before by a few of my colleagues, we still have to deal with quite a few legacy cases. And I believe someone mentioned that 80% of the cases that board attorneys see are still legacy cases. Due to differences that have been described in procedure with the different kind of cases, it does require some sort of specialization. Because 80% of the cases that attorneys work on are legacy, and then you have the AMA cases, attorneys have stated that they're having some trouble going back and forth. They have to kind of relearn AMA procedures over and over again while still doing legacy claims. This way, what we're suggesting is that some attorneys look specifically at legacy claims and work on those, and others work on AMA claims, just so we can kind of not waste the time involved in rethinking the AMA over and over again. We are still working primarily, attorneys are still working primarily on legacy appeals, and it just thinks, we just believe that streamlining would go a lot faster and would help attorneys.
Thank you, Ms. Slavic, and Chairwoman Leary, I yield back. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ranking Member Nels. I would next be calling on Dr. Ruiz in the order. I do not see him on the screen at this moment, so we will come back to him. And so next would be Mr. Moore, if he desires to ask questions. And not hearing from Mr. Moore, we will come back to him as well. I will call on Dr. Miller-Meeks.
Thank you so much, Representative Luria and Ranking Member Nels. And thank you again to all the panelists for that are here presenting to us. Ms. Slovic, I think that you mentioned, but I'd like you to expand on why the AFGE suggests that board attorneys be able to specialize in legacy or AMA appeals.
Thank you for your question. Essentially, as a few colleagues mentioned, there are many different ways that AMA claims reach the board. This is a slight, I don't want to say more complicated. This is a different procedural process than attorneys have been working on for years and years and years. We've been working with the legacy program and are very accustomed, attorneys have been working on the legacy program and are very accustomed to that system. Excuse me, I apologize, I have a cold. This way, we believe that instead of going backwards and forwards with the cases that we have, that attorneys have, they would be able to just know what they're working with without having to go through the training and look again and again about the processes involved in the AMA. Some people could specialize in one and some people could specialize in the other. Again, I apologize for my throat.
So as we heard in the last panel, number one, given the budgetary increases, the number of judges that are going to be retained and attorneys that are going to be retained, we've heard from Mr. Learman how rapidly they're processing through the claims. And we also heard from Mr. Brad Houston, who indicated that the timeline for online functionality should be completed by this fiscal year. So given the rapidity and efficiency with which they're getting through the legacy cases, the numbers of individuals that are currently being hired, I mean, wouldn't it be detrimental to promote specialization between legacy and AMA knowing that the legacy cases will be efficiently resolved and probably fairly rapidly. So then you have individuals who then lack the training to address the AMA cases, which will then become the bulk of the appeals process.
For board attorneys, training is an ongoing thing that consistently changes between the case law that changes and processes that change. And we do, as you mentioned, everyone does foresee in the next few years that legacy appeals will diminish. At this point, however, we do genuinely believe that getting as many legacy appeals done, finally bringing these veterans some peace with those decisions, is very important. And in order to do that, some streamlining, I think, would be helpful.
It would seem that you just emphasized the point I made to get these legacy cases done, and you're specializing. And then we anticipate that we may have another flux of individuals as we change the presumptive diagnosis and as some of the new qualifications for who can meet disability due to toxic exposure increases. So, I'll certainly keep an open mind and keep track of this, but it is something that I am concerned about as we go through this process. As a physician, I do both my specialty of ophthalmology, but also regular medicine. And so I think sometimes it's good to have a more broad outlook. Specialization can be good, can lead to efficiencies, but it also can lead to further backlog, as in you're then trying to get attorneys up to speed on the AMA process. So I thank you that. Representative Lurie, I yield back my time.
Thank you. And I want to thank you all for joining us today. It is clear from today's discussion, major strides have been made in providing veterans with timely resolution to their appeals. However, continued oversight is needed to make sure that the VA fulfills its promise to our veterans waiting in the legacy program, while also properly managing the new appeals system, so that we may never again have veterans waiting years and years for the VA to provide the benefits that they've earned. We will continue to follow up and hope that open communication and collaboration continues between the department and all stakeholders and our VA representatives, as well as our VSOs. And thank you for Afge for providing perspective from the attorneys. Finally, I want to thank all of our witnesses, and I'm grateful for the information that you've shared and appreciate your partnership in helping our veterans. With that, Mr. Nels, would you like to offer any closing remarks?
I will. Thank you, Chair Lurie, for your leadership on this committee, and I thank all the witnesses, obviously, for being here this morning. I think we have identified some key ways to move forward, and I look forward to partnering with the VA and the GAO, NOVA, and all of our VSO partners, to pursue that progress. It's with one thing in mind, and that is to support our veterans out there. And I yield back. Again, thank you and well done, ma'am.
Well, thank you, Mr. Nels. It's a pleasure to serve with you on this subcommittee, and I know that we are both dedicated to this work on behalf of our veterans. Again, thank everyone for being with us today. Without objection, that concludes today's hearing. All members will have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material. The hearing is now adjourned.